Last year we bought you a rock star. This year we bought you a real rock star. So what we're going to do is I'm going to ask Warren a series of questions over 25, 30 minutes, and then we'll take your questions in the crowd and let the students have a chance to ask Warren about his experiences. What do you think the lessons are of the last couple cycles that you've seen from an investor standpoint? We've got a lot of young kids out there. You've lived through multiple cycles in the...
I mean, when they get greedy, and we had this huge bubble in the most important asset the American public has, housing. I mean, so you had a huge bubble in something you could borrow heavily against. So you could run a margin account, in effect, on a house instead of stocks, and the conditions got very lax. And so when that bubble popped, but people came into that gradually. When they get fearful, it happens all at once. I mean, when people get scared, they all want to leave at one time. And we had them all want to leave at one time, and that'll happen again. It'll happen with a different set of circumstances, but the human animal will keep behaving pretty much the way it has in the past. So we will have periodic recessions. We'll have an occasional panic, which doesn't all recessions don't come from panics. But the good news is, if you look at the 20th century, in the 20th century, we had 2 world wars. We had the Great Depression. We had the flu epidemic. We had the Cold War. We had the atom bomb. You name it. The Dow Jones average went from 66 to 11,497. You know, with all these terrible things happening supposedly at various times. America works. And when I bought my first stock when I was 11, that was in the spring of 1942. And that was a couple months after Pearl Harbor. And we were getting clobbered in the Pacific at Corregidor and Bataan. I mean, the Death March of Bataan. And in the European theater, the Blitz of England was on. And the Dow was at about 100. But just look at where we are now. I mean, the country really works. The trick is, I mean, it seems to me the obligation of a society as prosperous as ours is to figure out how nobody gets left too far behind.
Right. That was interesting because last year Bono's speech was a lot about how America is a society of dreams and you can accomplish more here. It was actually one of the best speeches about the optimism America could have by a person who's not American by birth. So and I know you carry that optimism. So after all this, what makes you most optimistic for the next decade about America?
Well, just imagine, 1789. Just go back just a few hundred years. There wasn't anything here, I mean, in this country. And Sir Christopher Wren, I think, the designed St. Paul's Cathedral is buried there, and there's a little plaque there, and it says, if you seek my monument, look about you. Well, I say, in America, if you seek America's monument, look about you. This country has all come about in a few hundred years. We had less than 4 million people, when we became a country. China had 300 million people at that time. Europe had about 75 million. They were just as smart as we were. They worked just as hard as we did. They had natural resources that were similar to ours. And yet we ended up with a quarter of the world's GDP, a few hundred years later. We've got something that works, and we don't want to mess that up. We want to figure out what we do with this abundance better as we go along. But you don't have to worry about the system working. But you will have periodic recessions, and you will have an occasional panic brought on by something that who knows where it comes from. The thing to remember at that time, I wrote an op-ed piece in the New York Times in the fall of 2008, and I said, that the country will come back. It'll go through a big recession and everything, but it'll come back, and it's coming back. So don't ever worry about America. It'll tell you, you're in the right place.
So you've been famous for your investment strategy on basically that follows the opposite side of principles. Invest when the chips are down and ride it up. That served you well. So what's your favorite time that you were able to accomplish that, when you caught somebody down and moved
well,
up?
I always think my favorite time's gonna be tomorrow. It's always been fun. And there's a company here in Washington called Geico. And I first got exposed to that in 1950. I was 20 years. I was 19 years. It was 51. I'm sorry. I was 20 years old, and I came down here and I came down on a Saturday because I learned that my professor who I worshiped at Columbia named Ben Graham was the chairman. I got down here and the door was locked. And I went to the building because it was Saturday, and I pounded on the door, and some janitor let me in. And a marvelous fellow named Lorimer Davidson spent 4 hours with me teaching me all about insurance. And he helped me so much in life. You're going to get help by some wonderful people in life. It's a great thing to remember later on when you get to be my age, that all the help you've received from different people, because nobody does it alone. Obama got in trouble when he said that in the campaign, that nobody does it by themselves. Nobody does do it by themselves. We all sit in the shade of trees that were planted by others. So it's obligatory, I think, to plant a few trees ourselves if we've had good luck. It's been a great ride, but it's not over.
So you've owned. When did you actually buy Geico? When did you invest in Geico the first time?
Well, Geico, I met Lorimer Davidson when I was finishing up at Columbia, and then I started selling securities when I got out. I went out to my Aunt Alice, and my Aunt Alice would have bought anything from me. And so she bought 100 shares of Government Employees Insurance. It was the first stock I ever sold. And then a lot of years passed, and Mr. Davidson was very kind to me in a variety of ways. But I went in different directions. And then in 1976, the company got in big trouble because they miscalculated their reserves, and they were going broke. And so I came back here, and I bought a third of the company in the market in a very short period of time. And then in 1995, by now our third had become a half because they'd repurchased their shares. And I went out to see Mr. Davidson, who was out in Bethesda. He was 96 or 97. And he had a bunch of stock in Geico with no cost basis because he'd held it forever. And I said, Davey, if I make an offer for this company for cash, you're going to pay a big tax. And of course, if you die with the stock, you don't have that tax, and you get a stepped up basis. So I'm not going to make this offer unless it's all right with you. And he said to me, he said, Warren, he said, I've hoped for this all my life. And so we bought the rest of the company. He was a great man.
I'm going to start a little bit where the president left off, which is, this is your hometown. This is a part of your hometown. So what are your best memories about being around Georgetown? And
well, I delivered papers at Georgetown Hospital 66 years ago. And I developed this affinity because in the hospital, people tipped. My regular customers, the one that knew me, never tipped. But I would go to the hospital, and one of the things they would do, they would give me cash tips, but they also would tell me if they were a woman that had given birth to a baby that was, we'll say, 8 pounds, 11 ounces, they would whisper that number to me. And the numbers racket was very big in Washington that time, and they felt they were giving me this terribly valuable information, the exact time in which the baby was born or something. And I was supposed to bet on that number in the numbers racket that day. So I have a lot of memories of of Georgetown, and I was here during World War II, which was really a fascinating time to be in Washington. And my dad being in Congress, it was really a window on an extraordinary time in America. And of course, at that time, we were probably more united than at any time in my lifetime about a common goal. I mean, that was the time when people like Bobby Feller and all the athletes, the day the war broke out, went down and enlisted, and people really did voluntarily in a very high percentage play by the rules in terms of gasoline rationing and sugar rationing and meat rationing and all that. And we all bought savings bonds at school to help out the troops. So it was quite a period.
Well, so somewhere along there you started investing and changed the nature. And I've read stories that you started investing at 13, or whether they're true or not, but somewhere around that. And
it was 11.
what created the fascination with investing?
It took me 5 years. I had to save $120. It took me 5 years to get the $120 to buy a stock, 3 shares of City Service Preferred when I was 11. My dad originally was in the investment business. He really wasn't very interested in it, but I would go down on Saturday morning, and he had these books there in the office, and I read all those, and then I went to the Omaha Public Library, and I read every book on investments in the Omaha Public Library by the time we moved to Washington. And then when we got here, I had the Library of Congress.
Did you get through all those?
Oh, I read everything, and I just found it fascinating, and incidentally, I find it fascinating today. I mean, it's an activity. If you're a baseball player or something, your legs may go or something. Well, my legs have long gone, but it doesn't make any difference in what I do. So I literally have as much. I always have had fun working, but I have as much fun now as I've ever had in my life. I mean, I work with people. I love doing what I love, and it just doesn't get any better than that.
Well, the quote is that you tap dance to work.
I tap dance to work. Yeah.
And so what makes you do that?
Don't ask me to demonstrate, but incidentally, it was nice to get that round of applause at the start. But I've learned that crowds now applaud at the start because I'm 83 and they're not sure I'll be around at the end of the talk.
I've shared enough dinners with you know that you have more energy than anybody I know. So let's switch to a little bit on the philanthropy side. So
Sure.
President DeGioia talked about the Giving Pledge. How did you come up with the idea with Bill, and how are you doing on it? I mean,
Well, we're doing great. And it was, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, Bill and Melinda and I were out in California and talking, and I'm not exactly sure how it came up, but we decided to call or Wright David Rockefeller, and asked if he would host a dinner in New York for about 16 or 18 people, just to talk about philanthropy. And Oprah Winfrey came, and Mayor Bloomberg was there, and it was a private dinner. And I started having these people talk around the table as to how they developed their philosophy of philanthropy. It must have taken us 2.5 hours or so to get around. I mean, people were really interested in it. So Bill and I were at that dinner. We decided that maybe there would be a possibility of taking this passion which these people had shown and going to other people that had a great deal of money and see if we could develop something where people would pledge at least half their net worth. And we now have about 115 people. I've been dialing for dollars. I call these billionaires up, and sometimes they tell me how they can't do it. And I decided, I tell them I'm going to write a book on how to live on $500 million because apparently there's this great need. They just can't seem to figure out how to do it, and they need help. But it's been very rewarding. And I received a letter from one woman. She and her husband had over $10 billion, and she sent me a tie. She sent me 2 ties, and she sent me this handwritten note and said that they hadn't really faced it. It's a little like facing your own mortality to some extent, making that plan. And that's tough for people sometimes. And so she and her husband had changed things, and over half of that $10 billion was going to go to philanthropy. They do tend to postpone the decision. So I tell these people I call, the last will is what counts, but I tell them, if I'm talking to some 70-year-old, I say, do you really think your decision-making ability is going to be better when you're 95 with some blonde on your lap or now? So let's get on board, fellas.
And I assume that convinces them maybe the 70-year-old decision's better at that point, right?
Well, Bill has done it. Bill has gotten people around the world because he travels more than I do. But what we're hoping is people do pick up on norms. I mean, when I was young, I read about Carnegie and Rockefeller and different people. Bill did too. And you do pick up behavior from those who come before. And we've collected letters from every one of these people. They're up on our website at thegivingpledge.org. And I think they're worth reading. They're pretty remarkable. And of course, what we really want to do is get the younger people, like Mark Zuckerberg's joined us, for example. And he obviously is going to appeal to a much wider group than I would. So we hope it becomes, this gospel of wealth that Andrew Carnegie came up with 100 years or so ago. That's influenced all kinds of people. Well, we've got better stories than that, on these letters. So I just hope it moves. Now, I don't think, I want to emphasize one thing. Nobody in our group has given away $1 that in any way affects how they live. I mean, I have the much greater admiration, frankly, for the person who drops $5 or $1 in a collection plate on Sunday, where it makes a difference in whether they go take their kids to a movie or whether they go eat out or something of the sort. They are actually giving up something that has utility to them. I am giving up nothing that has utility to me. I have everything in the world I want that can be bought by money. So I have a whole bunch of stock certificates. They have no utility to me, and they can possibly have enormous utility to other people in vaccines or education or all kinds of things. So people that give up something that actually can have utility to their family and give that to some other person so it has utility to them, those are the people I really think deserve the kudos. But it's still nice to go where the money is. I mean, it's the Willie Sutton approach. So if we can work on polio or something like that, and it takes big contributions, then we want to go after it.
So, I mean, the unique part of what you've done is with Bill and Melinda and their foundation, and on the one hand, how you're doing it, and secondly, that you've gone and said whatever the number will be, but almost all your wealth.
All my Berkshire
right.
wealth.
And so, talk about the Gates relationship and why you chose them as opposed to creating your own foundation or something.
Well, originally my wife and I planned when we were in our 20s that when we had everything we needed, we would use the rest for society. And I thought she would outlive me. She was younger, and women live longer. And then she died in 2004. So I had to come up with a different plan. And if you've read Adam Smith and the specialization of labor, you know that if you're good at one thing, you're not necessarily good at another. You ought to get the person. You ought to use your talents where they're most useful, and get other people to give their talents. So when my wife had babies, I mean, I went to an obstetrician. I didn't deliver myself. When I get a toothache, I go to a dentist. So I wanted to go to people who were very good at giving away money and who were younger, energetic, smart, and had the same objectives in philanthropy that I did. And the basic principle of the Gates Foundation is that every human life has equal value. And if you start with that as your basic assumption, then a lot of things flow from that. And Bill and Melinda, as well as my children, because I have foundations for each one of my three children that are of significant size. And you can read the letters I wrote them up on the Berkshire Hathaway website. I do not direct them to do anything, but I do tell them to swing for the fences. I tell them if they succeed at everything they do in philanthropy, they're doing the wrong things, because the important things are the tough ones, and you're going to fail at some of those. But I have got much younger people, very energetic people, common objectives, and they work for nothing. So that's not a bad deal, Brian.
That stretches the money a long way.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the way I read it is that you require them to actually move the money out the other side.
They got to spend it. And when I die, all of the money has to be spent within 10 years after the estate is closed, because I do not think that I can pick out some little great-great-grandchild yet to be born, just because he has the right name of Buffett or she has the right name, and they will be the best custodians. I mean, there'll be plenty of philanthropists 50 years after I die to take care of the problems of 50 years, but I want the money to get spent promptly, and I don't believe in trying to control things from the grave. I mean, I like to think I can think outside the box, but thinking outside of that particular box.
That may take a lot of philanthropy to figure it out. Recently I read an article about Eastlake and Tom Cousins. So this week, as many people know, the PGA finishes up its tournament at Eastlake, which is a golf course in Atlanta. And the story I read about the development is that you've now helped Tom Cousins in the development work he does with communities. Talk a little about that, because that's a little different than this type of thing.
Yeah, but it's the same theory of loving to back people who are putting their own time and energy and who are successful into a project that's worthwhile. Tom Cousins is a remarkable man who lives in Atlanta. Just extraordinary. And he took this terrible, terrible neighborhood called Eastlake in Atlanta, and against a lot of community opposition, everything it was crime-ridden, and nobody did it well in school and everything else. And he decided you had to apply a holistic approach to it, and you couldn't just attack this thing or that thing. So he worked for probably 10 years to develop this entirely new community out of this total disaster. And then Tom and I talked about it, and I said, Tom, everybody's going to say that it can only be done because you're Tom Cousins and you live in Atlanta and you've done this. So he and I and a fellow named Julian Robertson, but primarily Tom, decided to see if we could replicate this in other communities. And it seemed to me that, and Tom, that New Orleans was a great one to do it. I mean, they've been racked by Katrina and everything. So we've taken it to New Orleans, where we've got hundreds of people, and it's mixed income type community. I mean, we do not want to have it with everybody being subsidized. We want to create a new kind of community where people of different races, different economic conditions work together and play together. And it's been successful in New Orleans. We went to Indianapolis. It's been successful there, and we've got about 11 more towns we're working on now. And so Tom Cousins has really come up with something. He had an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal about a week ago describing this, but he's a fantastic human being. And when you get a chance to join forces with somebody that as high quality as that, and energetic and smart, and putting his own funds in it, you just got to jump at the chance. That's good.
We'll switch to the economy now. What's going on, and move from philanthropy to the economy that you create your wealth off of, that you can do these wonderful, great things with. So what do you see in the economy and what you're seeing in your companies, your operating companies, and from an investor's point?
Well, business has come back very well from 5 years ago when the panic hit. And it was a panic like nobody's ever seen. I mean, whatever you think about it, it was worse. I'm dead serious about that. We were right on the edge of the cliff. And fortunately, I give enormous credit to both Ben Bernanke and Hank Paulson and Tim Geithner, and frankly, even though I didn't vote for him, never voted for him, President Bush. I don't know how many of you have studied economics, but in Adam Smith they talk about comparative advantage, and Keynes talked about animal spirits and all those people. But President Bush really came out with a great economic insight of all times, and he did it in 10 words in September of 2008. He went out there from the White House and he said, "If money doesn't loosen up, this sucker could go down." And I mean, that goes right up there. Tear down those plaques of Adam Smith. And he backed up those fellows. And so we've come back from it. But business has come back. A lot of companies are having record profits, including many of ours. And the American populace as a whole has not come back. I mean, inequality is getting wider. The Forbes 400, which just came out, showed aggregate wealth for the Forbes 400 of $2 trillion. You go back 20 years and that was 300 billion. So it's up 6 or 7 for one. It's different people to some extent, but this is the top. 300 billion to 2 trillion. And if you read the paper today, you'd have seen that the median income, is the same place it was in terms of real purchasing power. From 1989, it hasn't changed. So the inequality is getting wider. The rich are doing extremely well, extraordinarily well. And business is doing well. Business profit margins are terrific compared to the record historically. Business returns on tangible equity are terrific. But most, a great many people in our country, if you take the bottom 20% of households, that's 24 million households or something like that, housing, close to about 60 million people, it's the top level is $22,000. I don't want to try to live on $22,000 with a couple of kids. So we've got an economy that is delivering $50,000 of GDP per capita, and we've got an awful lot of people that aren't living well. So we have learned how to turn out lots of goods and services, but we haven't learned as well how to have everybody share in the bounty that we have.
So how do you think, is that we just got to grow out of it to provide?
Well, we're growing. We're growing. Yeah. I mean, if you take even 2% a year, if you think about it, people feel very unhappy with 2% a year, but the population grows 1% a year. So that means 1% per capita real growth. That means in 20 years, a generation, there's a 20% gain in GDP per capita. That's not bad in a generation. But the question is how it gets distributed. Right. But this country this system works. In my lifetime, I was born in 1930. I was conceived in 1929 because my dad was a stock salesman, and after the crash, he didn't have anything to do. Nobody. So I look back with great fondness on the 1929 crash. But since 1930, since I was born in 1930, real GDP per capita has increased 6 for 1. Just think of that, 6 for 1. I mean, you went centuries when nothing happened. Right. for people, and this country works. I mean, I consider the luckiest person on a probabilistic basis that ever lived is the baby that's born today in the United States. I mean, it is a fabulous country, and the market system works, all kinds of things. But we do have to, in my view, we have to make sure that everybody participates to a reasonable degree. We don't want equality results, but we also want a base level that's satisfactory for our people.
Well, let's turn it over to some student questions. So they're going to put a microphone out here, and go ahead, sir.
Hi, I'm Kasim Tavalali, a senior in the SFS. I was wondering if you have any stock tips for any of the students. We're all trying to make a little living.
I didn't think they taught that at Georgetown. The best investment I ever made. Well, I bought a book in 1949 by a fellow named Ben Graham called The Intelligent Investor. I don't remember what I paid, but aside from what I paid for my 2 marriage licenses, that was the best investment I ever made. It's very important to have the right framework. You need to have an approach to investing that's sound. And Graham's approach is simple, but some people adopt to it, and which I did immediately, and most people don't. But if you have the right philosophy, you will find opportunities as you go through the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And frankly, you're most likely to find them when in periods like 5 years ago when we were having the panic. I mean, stocks sell at silly prices from time to time. Most stocks at one time or another sell at very silly prices. And it doesn't take a high IQ to figure out that they're cheap, but it does take a temperament that's willing to step up and actually act. I tell people, if they're going into the investment business, if you got 160 IQ, sell 30 points to somebody else because you won't need it. I mean, I figured out very early, you don't have to be that smart in this business, which is fortunate, but you do have to have the right temperament. And you have to be able to ignore what other people are saying and simply look at the facts and decide, is this stock which is selling at X worth 2X? And occasionally you'll find things like that. And when you don't find them, you don't do anything. So that's my generalized stock tip, no names.
I'll make it simpler. Just buy Bank of America and you'll be set.
Yeah.
It worked all right for him.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Next question, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Nicholas Walker. I'm a sophomore in the SFS as well. So, Mr. Buffett, in the past, you invested in China, South Korea, and Israel. And recently, you partnered with 3G Capital and Jorge Paulo Lemann from Brazil over for the Heinz deal. Does this mean, are you tempted to venture into the Brazil market next?
I didn't get the question.
The question, you did the Heinz deal. The question is, are you going to invest in Brazil next?
I don't know where I'm going to invest next. That's what makes my job interesting. I mean, I'm not kidding. I mean, if you went out and played golf and every drive went in the hole, you'd give up. The game wouldn't be interesting. I mean, what's interesting is when you get in the rough and have to come out and a few things like that. So I love the fact that I don't know what I'm going to do next. You mentioned the Israel investment. In 2006, in the fall, I got a letter from a fellow, and I never heard of him, and I never heard of the company he was talking about. But he said, my name is Eitan Wertheimer, and I want to tell you a little about my company, Ishkar. The letter was a page and a half long, and he said, if he sold the company, the family sold the company, the only company they wanted to sell it to was Berkshire Hathaway. And if I was interested, they'd be glad to come over from Israel and explain it to me. And it just jumped off the page that this was an interesting idea. So I emailed them, and they came over very shortly, and we bought the business. We handed them $4 billion for 80% of a company where I'd never seen it or anything. Eitan kept saying, you got to come over to Israel and see the plants and everything. You won't believe how wonderful they are. And I said, Eitan, I don't go to Council Bluffs, Iowa. I mean, I am doing fine in Omaha. And he said, no, you got to see it. I said, no, I don't. I said, we can make a deal without seeing it. He said, well, if you buy the company, will you come and see it? I said, if we buy the company, I'll come. So we bought the company, and I went over there, and it's true. I've never seen plants like this. It was the greatest operation I've ever seen. And Eitan said to me, he said, that's why I want you to come over to see these things. I said, listen, Eitan, if I'd come and seen them, I'd have paid more money. So we have a wonderful partnership with the people in Israel. But I don't know tomorrow. Our partnership with the people in Brazil, with Jorge Paulo Lemann and his associates, they are sensational people. I got to know Jorge Paulo when I was on the board of Gillette with him. And the opportunity to buy into a wonderful business like Heinz and to be partners, and they'll do all the heavy lifting. They run the place with Jorge Paulo and his associates. I mean, it's a great opportunity for us. And I don't know what the opportunity will be tomorrow. With Jorge Paulo, as last December, I was going out to Boulder, Colorado, where he had a group that met, and he said, I think I've got an idea might interest you. Want to get out there? And so I went out there, and as we came back on the plane, he explained what he was thinking about in terms of Heinz, and I said, count me in. And I will tell you one other thing, which is quite impressive about him. After I said that and went a little further in the thing, he sent me a one-page governance description of how it would work between the two of us, and he sent me a very brief description of what he thought would be a fair deal for both of us. I didn't have to change a word. I mean, those are the kind of people you like to associate with.
You mentioned that people will make the same mistakes in terms of the boom-bust cycle. But there have been several recent financial developments, such as the creation of derivatives, which has since exploded recently, and you once called derivatives weapons of mass destruction.
Right.
Now that derivatives are a $700 trillion industry, do you see this as setting the stage for the next financial crisis?
It's very hard to tell that, we've enacted Dodd-Frank. And if you look at what happened in September and October of 2008, there were some extraordinary things done. The Federal Reserve poured $85 billion into AIG, and if they hadn't, our world would be very different. Hank Paulson guaranteed money market funds at a time when 30 million Americans with money market funds were panicking, and when $300 billion in 3 days had gone out of the non-government money market funds, 125 of it had gone back into the government. 300 billion, that was almost equal to the deposits of Wells Fargo or Wachovia at the time, which were then two separate institutions. Both of those authorities have essentially been taken. I don't think they can do that under Dodd-Frank. I don't think that Bernanke could do what he did, and I don't think that Paulson can do what he did. When there's a panic, the only thing that will stop it, basically, is when somebody who has the ability and the will says, I'm going to do whatever it takes. And basically, that's what Bernanke and Paulson, and finally, Congress in a kind of a reluctant way, but said to the American public. And you could believe it. If Bernanke said, I'm going to do whatever it takes, nobody knows what Section 13.3 of the Federal Reserve Act is. And it wasn't probably meant to do what he did with it, but he did it. And the same way with they call it the Exchange Stabilization Fund of the Treasury. It was enacted back in 1934. Nobody dreamt it would be used to take care of money market funds. But you had these strong characters who had the ability to print money in the case of Bernanke, and they said, we're going to do whatever it takes. And the president was behind them. That is the way you end a real panic. And I worry actually that Congress doesn't like to give anybody that much authority, and it bothers them that the Fed has all this authority, or that Paulson acted as he did in TARP. And I tip my hat to them, and I'm not sure. There will be another panic. Where it comes from, who knows? But when that time comes, the question will be, are the people who have panicked, who have frozen, who have caused the economic engine to stop, will they believe and come right back and be doing something? And I'm not sure whether what's been enacted is a plus or a minus in that regard. Regardless, the country will come through. But it's very hard to write regulations that will keep people from acting foolishly, particularly when acting foolishly has been proven very profitable over the preceding few years. It's just the way it works. Humans, they all think they're Cinderella at the ball, and they think, as the night goes along, the music gets better and the drinks flow and everything, and they all think they're going to leave at 2 minutes to 12. And of course, there's no clocks on the wall, and they're still dancing. So it'll happen again. But buy when it happens.
Next question.
I'll be buying.
Hi, my name's John Ruff. I'm from Georgia, so I'm familiar with the work over at Eastlake.
Oh, that's great.
Appreciative. But you talked a little bit about income inequality. But if you look at class mobility rates, and if you look at average household income for middle-class families measured with inflation, a lot of these rates have been trending down since the 1970s. And some may argue that it's harder today for the middle class than it's been in 30 years. And I was wondering if you had any more thoughts on how a rising tide can lift all boats and not just the yachts.
Yeah. Well, that's what's happened. It's like John Kennedy talked about, a rising tide lifting all yachts. And the yachts have been lifted, like I say, for the top 400 from 300 billion to 2 trillion just in the last 20 years. There is a very, I think, structural problem as a market system gets more and more specialized. If you go back to an agrarian society like we had a couple hundred years ago with most people working on a farm, most people fit most job requirements. I mean, it was that as the world has become more and more specialized, I think we keep moving away from that. So a market system will not pay well for a significant percentage of society. They aren't needed to keep GDP itself going up and people at the top. And I think government has to address that. I think I sometimes toss out to students this proposition. Imagine that it's 24 hours before you're born. And you're sitting there, Johnny or Joni, we don't know yet, and you're in the womb, and a genie comes. And the genie says, John or Joni, you strike me as a remarkable potential human being, and I'm going to give you an enormous responsibility. I'm going to let you decide the world, how the world is going to work into which you're going to emerge. You can decide on the economic system, the social system, the political system. You design it. And whatever you design, that's going to be the system in which you live, your children live, grandchildren live. And you, being wise beyond your minus 24 hours of age, say, I know all about you genies. What's the catch? And the genie says there's one catch. Just before you emerge, having designed a system, put it in cement, you're going to go over to that barrel over there that has 7 billion slips in it, one for every human being in the world, and you're going to pull out a slip. It may say male, it may say female, it may say white, it may say black, it may say infirm, it may say strong, it may say bright, it may say below average. It may say United States, it may say Bangladesh. Now, not knowing which ticket you're going to pull out, what kind of a world do you want to design? Well, you certainly want to design a world that produces lots of goods and services and keeps producing more and more. You want a lot of stuff around. It could be the world's fairest society, but if it's on a barren desert island, it isn't going to do anybody good. So you really want something that works in terms of output. But once you have something that works in terms of output, you certainly want something that eliminates fear from everybody's life. Now, that doesn't just mean a lot of cops. It means fear of old age, fear of health, all of those problems. And you certainly want a system not knowing what tickets you're going to get. that takes care of the people that don't survive so well in that market system, which maximizes the amount of output, your first goal. And I think we've done a wonderful job at the first stage. We have learned how to turn out lots of stuff. We have not thought as much, although we've thought a fair amount. I mean, when Social Security came in and all of that, I mean, this country has developed in terms of thinking about how a rich family should behave. But we have not, I think we are in the stage where we need to focus more on making sure that the people who get the bad tickets do better than they are. And, you know, we said that blacks were 3/5 or slaves were 3/5 of a person back when we started. And said, you know, we said all men are created equal in 1776, and in 1789 we said blacks are 3/5 of a person. You know, we not only said all men are created equal, but in the Gettysburg Address, you know, Lincoln repeated it. It was 1920 before we passed the 19th Amendment for women. So we treated women as an essentially different class for all those years. So I think we've gone significantly in the right direction in terms of behaving better as a society, and I think we've gone terrifically in the right direction in terms of turning out lots of stuff. But I think we have to address the question of how do you treat the people that are left behind in a system that maximizes the output of goods and services. And that can only come through government.
Good evening. My name is James Fishback. I'm in the School of Foreign Service first year. It's no doubt that you're an outspoken fan of Ben Bernanke, but no, he's going to be stepping down in January of next year. Whomever takes over the position, do you think that they should continue the Fed's controversial buyback program? And if so, for how long?
Well, I think they should take Bernanke's approach, which he says he's going to keep doing until he sees more improvement in the economy. And I think he's been mildly disappointed, not hugely disappointed, but mildly disappointed in the rate of improvement in the economy in the last few years, and therefore, just the other day, he said he's going to extend it further until he sees it. So he's not prejudging exactly when it's going to happen. He's telling you the conditions under which he'll change, and the economy is getting better. We are in an experiment which hasn't really been tried before. I mean, Fed has a $3.5 trillion balance sheet, and buying securities is usually easier than selling securities, as sometimes people find out. So we don't know how this game plays out. And just the announcement, whenever it was a few months ago, or the hint that tapering was going to occur, you know, that had some significant market reactions, probably 100 basis points or so in the 10-year. And what will happen when they actually, if they actually try to deleverage the Fed? I mean, what's happened is the American public deleveraged and the government leveraged up through the Fed. If the Fed deleverages that in any big way, that will be a new experiment. And
But Warren, as we were talking earlier, the question is, when they do that, the economy has to be growing faster.
economy has to be doing well.
And the piece people don't take into account is they're clear that they're going to stay there until the economy grows faster.
And he has no pressure on him. In fact, you know, the Fed is the greatest hedge fund in history. I mean, you've got $1.1 trillion financed by currency and circulation, which doesn't cost anything, and they got about $1.8 trillion or $1.9 trillion from the banks at 25 basis points. And I mean, the Fed is going to make $80 billion or something like that. The Fed is the fourth largest contributor to the United States government's revenues that there is now. That wasn't the case a few years back, but it's 80 or 90 billion a year probably. And it is under no pressure, none whatsoever, to have to deleverage. So it can pick its time, and if you have somebody wise there, and I think Bernanke's wise, and I certainly expect his successor to be, it can be handled. But it is something that's never quite been done on this scale. It'll be interesting to watch.
No, it will be, and we've seen a lesson in the market moving ahead and back just based on the last 30 days. So I think we're going to take one more question, and then from the next student.
My name is Shirley, and I'm from China. I'm currently a graduate student in Georgetown. My friend Dennis Zhao and I, we are both a very big fan of you and your friend Charlie. And we read his book, which is very interesting. He had this whole system of criteria on how to evaluate a company. It's all very confusing, but he said that Warren and I are always staying away from the industries we don't know. So you have candies, railways, and Coca-Cola. But now the world is changing, and we are living in a new era. The business models are changing. The B2C platforms, everybody is shopping online. Maybe in a few years, everyone is going to pay with their iPhones, and Bank of America no longer issues credit cards. So non-profit is a new model, and
So what's a dinosaur like me going to do? Yeah.
yeah, there's just so many things you don't know about.
He'll take out his flip phone and show you, so he's
Yeah.
not going to be one.
This is my new one.
It's going to take. It's going to
I
take.
just turned in the one Alexander Graham Bell gave me. But,
So the question is, the business models are changing, the world are changing. The new technology, they're changing everything. There's no way you can just stay out of it and stay with the traditional. Now, for the private investors, especially in the venture capital industry, what would you think is the most important thing, the key in evaluating a company? I'm not asking about doing mediocre, I'm not asking about being average, but about excellent, remarkable. Just
Well,
name one thing.
the most important thing is to be able to define which ones you can come to an intelligent decision on and which ones are beyond your capacity to evaluate. You don't have to be right about thousands and thousands and thousands of companies. You only have to be right about a couple. I met Bill Gates on July 5th, 1991. We were out in Seattle, and Bill said, "You've got to have a computer." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "You can do your income tax on it." I said, "I don't have any income. Berkshire doesn't pay a dividend." He said, "Well, you can keep track of your portfolio." And I said, "I only have one stock." I said, and he says, "It's going to change everything." And I said, "Well, will it change whether people chew gum?" And he said, "Well, probably not." And I said, "Well, will it change what kind of gum they chew?" And not. And I said, "Well, then I'll stick to chewing gum and you stick to computers." I don't have to understand all kinds of business. There's all kinds of business I don't understand. But there's thousands of opportunities there. I did understand the Bank of America, and I'll be able. I'm able to do that. I'm able to understand some given percentage. But Ted Williams wrote a book called The Science of Hitting, and in The Science of Hitting, he's got a diagram, shows him at the plate, and he's got the strike zone divided into 77 squares, each the size of a baseball. And he says, if I only swing at pitches in my sweet zone, which he shows there, and he has what his batting average would be, which is 400. If he had to swing at low outside pitches, but still in the strike zone, his average would be 230. He said the most important thing in hitting is waiting for the right pitch. Now, he was at a disadvantage because if the count was 0-2 or 1-2 or so on, even if that ball was down where he was only going to bat 230, he had to swing at it. In investing, there's no called strikes. People can throw Microsoft at me and, you name it, any stock, General Motors, and I don't have to swing. And nobody's going to call me out on called strikes. I only get a strike called if I swing at a pitch and miss. So I can wait there and look at thousands of companies day after day. And only when I see something I understand and when I like the price at which it's selling, then if I swing, if I hit it, fine. If I miss it, it's a strike. But it's an enormously advantageous game. And it's a terrible mistake to think you have to have an opinion on everything. You only have to have an opinion on a few things. In fact, I've told students, if when they got out of school, they got a punch card with 20 punches on it, and that's all the investment decisions they got to make in their entire life, they would get very rich because they would think very hard about each one. And you don't need 20 right decisions to get very rich. 4 or 5 will probably do it over time. So I don't worry too much about the things I don't understand. If you understand some of these businesses that are coming along and can spot things on, if you can spot on Amazon, for example, it's a tremendous accomplishment what Jeff Bezos has done. And I tip my hat to him. He's a wonderful businessman. He's a good guy too. But could I have anticipated that he would be the success and 10 others wouldn't be? I'm not good enough to do that. But fortunately, I don't have to. I don't have to form an opinion on Amazon. And I did form an opinion on the Bank of America. And I formed an opinion on Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola's been around since 1886. There's 1.8 billion 8-ounce servings of Coca-Cola products sold every day. Now, if you take 1 penny and get 1 penny extra, that's $18 million a day. And 18 million times 365 is 7 billion, 3 less 730 billion, or $6,570 million. So annually, $6,570 million from 1 penny. You think Coca-Cola is worth a penny more than, Joe's Cola? I think so. So, and I've got about 127 years of history that would indicate it. So those are the kind of decisions I like to make. And you may have an entirely different field of expertise than I would have, and probably much more up to date in terms of the kind of businesses that we're seeing evolve. And you can get very rich if you just understand a few of them and understand their future. But fortunately, I don't have to. I mean, if we go into Heinz, and I look at people pouring ketchup on, hamburgers and potatoes, I don't think it's going to change. And the nice thing about it, some products travel, some products don't travel. Candy bars don't travel well. I mean, if you look at the Cadbury bars in England, they don't sell well here. And if you look at the Hershey bars here, they don't sell as well someplace else. Soft drinks travel, and ketchup travels. I like products that travel.
Warren, I want to thank you for taking the time to work with the students today. And I think for all the students out there, just think about this. This is a person who, with a passion, he still has at 83 to make that right investment decision. But importantly, what we talked a lot earlier about is the ability to try to do something with all that wealth that will help a pretty near-term set of goals in society. And I think you will find very few people in the world have been able to do both things so well as Warren Buffett has, and there's a lesson to learn for all of us in that. So thank you for spending the time.
Thank you.